The room smelled like old paper and central heating turned up too high. Daniel had arrived 20 minutes early. He didn't know why he bothered, habit probably. 31 years of arriving early to things that involved his father had left a groove in him he couldn't step out of. Early to appointments. Early to surgeries. Early to the long beige waiting rooms where time moved differently and the coffee was always burnt and nobody ever had anything useful to say. He chose a chair near the window. Not the one closest to the lawyer's desk. Not the one farthest from the door. Just a chair. He set his envelope on the table in front of him and folded his hands and waited. Marcus arrived 11 minutes late. He came in still wearing his coat, a charcoal wool thing that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly car payment, and he was sliding his phone into his pocket as he entered, which meant he'd been on it until the last possible second. He looked around the room with the mild, assessing expression of a man checking into a hotel he hadn't chosen himself. His eyes landed on Daniel. Something in his face arranged itself into the appropriate register. Grief adjacent. Brotherly. Dan, he said. Marcus, Daniel said. They did not embrace. They had stopped doing that sometime in the last decade, and neither of them had formally acknowledged it. It had simply stopped the way certain things do, gradually, then completely. Marcus sat down across from him. The lawyer, a careful man named Mr. Ellison, came in shortly after and began arranging his documents with the unhurried precision of someone who had done this many times and understood that the people across from him were usually in no condition to be rushed. Daniel watched his brother while Ellison prepared. Marcus had their father's jaw, the same clean line of it, the same way it set when he was thinking about something he didn't want to say. He'd flown in the previous night. Daniel knew this because their father's neighbor, Mrs. Parrish, had mentioned seeing an unfamiliar car in the driveway around 10. Not because Marcus had called. Not because Marcus had thought to say, I'm coming in, I'll be there by morning, do you need anything? He hadn't visited once in the last 4 years. Daniel knew the exact number because he had driven to that house. The house on Carver Street with the leaning front gate and the garden their mother had planted before she died. He had driven there 214 times. He wasn't counting when he started. He only knew the number because he'd looked it up once, late at night, in the mileage log he kept for taxes. 214 visits. Chemotherapy appointments. Prescription pickups. The slow and unglamorous bureaucracy of keeping someone alive. He wasn't telling himself this to feel righteous. He was telling himself this because it was accurate. There was a difference. Ellison began reading. The language was formal and meandering in the way legal language always is, a long approach to a simple destination. Daniel kept his eyes on the middle distance. He had already made a kind of peace with this part. He had made it 2 years ago, actually, sitting in the same lawyer's office, on a different afternoon, when his father had looked at him across a similar table and said, with the exhausted clarity of a man who had very little energy left for softening things, I want to do this correctly. I want you to understand what I'm doing and why. The accounts, the car, personal effects, the house on Carver Street, all of it to Marcus. Daniel heard his brother exhale slowly, not dramatically, just a release of something held, a quiet confirmation of what he'd apparently expected, or hoped for, or perhaps simply calculated. When Daniel finally looked at him, Marcus had the expression of a man who had just won an argument no one else had known was happening. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The expression was enough. It said, I knew. Whatever you thought you meant to him, I knew. Daniel looked back at Ellison. Ellison had paused. He was looking down at his papers with the focused attention of a man reading something for accuracy rather than performance. He removed one document from the stack, examined it, and set it apart from the others with the care of someone who understood its weight. There is a secondary instrument, Ellison said. A deed of property transfer, executed and recorded 26 months ago. The room went very quiet. The property at Carver Street was transferred out of your father's sole ownership at that time. The transfer was voluntary and documented. Capacity was certified by 2 independent physicians and a notary retained separately from this office. Ellison looked up. The property has not been part of your father's estate since that recording. Marcus turned to look at Daniel. Daniel did not look back. The transfer was made to Daniel Andrew Holt, Ellison came in tune. In full, without condition. The coat, Daniel thought distantly, looked different now. Still expensive, just less like armor. He heard Marcus say his name, Dan, in a tone he hadn't heard before, somewhere between a question and the beginning of a sentence that hadn't found its shape yet. Daniel reached forward and picked up his envelope. Inside was a copy of the deed. He had read it 17 times since the afternoon his father had handed it to him, in this same office, with hands that trembled slightly from the medication, but eyes that were entirely steady. I want you to have it before I go, his father had said. I don't want it to be a surprise. I don't want it to be a performance. I want you to just have it and know. He folded the envelope and put it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Thank you, he said to Ellison. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He was aware of his brother watching him, not with anger yet, that would come later. Through other channels, probably involving a phone call Daniel wouldn't answer for several days, but with something more disoriented. Something that looked, if Daniel was honest, like a man who had prepared for a conversation that had already ended without him. He said nothing else. There wasn't anything to say. The document had said it in the flat and indifferent language of county records offices and notarized signatures. His father had said it 2 years ago in a quiet room with two physicians present. He walked to his car. He sat for a moment in the driver's seat without starting the engine. The afternoon was gray and still. The street outside Ellison's office was ordinary. Parking meters, a dry cleaner, a woman walking a dog that kept stopping to investigate the base of a lamppost. He didn't feel like a man who had won anything. He felt like a man who had been faithful to something for a very long time, and who was now simply tired in the particular way that faithfulness makes you tired. Not bitterly, not resentfully, but thoroughly. Down to the floor of it. He started the car. On the kitchen counter at Carver Street, there was a key on a plain metal ring. It had been there for 2 years. It had always been his. He had never once needed to say so. He drove home.